Welcome to Speak Up, the podcast where we explore work, lifestyle, and everything in between. I'm your host, Ryan, and today we're talking about a very relevant topic: how to start working online from home. Whether you're a stay-at-home parent, a student, or someone looking to leave your 9-to-5, this episode is for you. Remote work has grown rapidly, especially since the pandemic. More people want flexibility, better work-life balance, and a chance to earn money from home. But with so many options, it's hard to know where to start. That's why today, we'll cover different online job options, the tools and skills you need, how to avoid scams, and how to land your first gig. I'm not going at this alone. Joining me today is Julia, an expert who successfully transitioned from a corporate job to full-time freelancing. She's been working online for over 5 years and has helped many others make the switch. Welcome, Julia.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. I'm excited to share my experience. Like many of your listeners, I started in a regular 9-to-5 but wanted more freedom. I began with small freelance jobs, and now I run a full-time business from home. I'm looking forward to sharing practical tips and strategies today.
In this episode, we'll discuss the types of online jobs available, how to figure out which one is right for you, the essential tools and skills you'll need, and how to avoid common scams. By the end, you'll have a clear plan to get started working online. Let's dive in. All right, Julia, we've been seeing this huge rise in people wanting to work from home, especially in the last few years. It feels like everyone's talking about online jobs and remote work. So I guess the big question is, why now? What's driving this massive shift towards remote work? It wasn't like this 10 or 15 years ago. Back then, it was more of a niche thing. Now, it's become this huge movement where people are rethinking how they work. What do you think is the biggest reason behind this sudden explosion of interest in working online?
You're absolutely right, Ryan. The shift toward remote work is massive, and it's not just a trend. It's becoming the new normal. If I had to pinpoint a reason, I'd say a big factor was the pandemic. When COVID-19 hit, companies had no choice but to let employees work from home. And what happened was pretty surprising. Productivity didn't drop the way some people feared. In fact, many companies found their teams were just as productive, if not more productive, working remotely. So that was the initial push. But beyond that, it's also about how people's priorities have changed. People want more control over their lives. They don't want to be tied to a 9-to-5, spending hours commuting to an office. They want flexibility. They want to be able to work from home, a cafe, or even another country. Plus, technology has made it easier than ever. Tools like Zoom, Slack, and cloud-based systems allow teams to collaborate no matter where they are in the world.
I think you've hit on something really important there. This idea of control and flexibility. It's a game changer. I mean, think about it. Instead of spending hours commuting, people are spending that time with their families, exercising, or just enjoying their mornings. I know people who've told me they've started new hobbies or taken up side projects because remote work gave them that extra time back. But it's not just about lifestyle, right? There's a financial aspect too. People are saving money by working from home. No more spending on gas, commuting, office lunches. And for companies, they're saving money on office space. I've even heard of companies downsizing their offices or going fully remote, cutting costs in ways they hadn't even considered before the pandemic. Do you think that financial benefit plays a big part in why companies are embracing remote work?
Absolutely, Ryan. The financial benefits are huge, both for individuals and companies. Let's talk about individuals first. People working from home are saving a lot on commuting costs. No more spending on gas, train tickets, or parking. And that's just the start. There's also the money saved on office attire. People don't need to buy business clothes as often or spend money on dry cleaning. Then there's food. When you're working in an office, you're more likely to eat out or grab something quickly on the go, which adds up. At home, you can make your own meals, saving even more. For companies, the savings can be even bigger. Imagine a company that used to rent out an entire floor of an office building in a major city. Now, if they go fully remote, or even just adopt a hybrid model, they can downsize or completely eliminate that overhead. And we're talking tens of thousands of dollars, maybe more, saved every month. That's a big incentive. So yes, financial reasons are definitely playing a role, but I also think companies are seeing other benefits, like access to a global talent pool. They're no longer restricted to hiring people within commuting distance. They can hire the best person for the job no matter where they live.
Yeah, that global talent pool is something that I think is really overlooked sometimes. I mean, suddenly companies don't have to limit their hiring to just people in the same city or country. You can hire someone in India, Europe, South America, anywhere, as long as they're the right fit for the job. That's powerful, especially for startups or smaller companies who might have struggled to find the right talent locally. And on the flip side, it opens up a ton of opportunities for people who might not have had access to certain jobs because of where they live. A person in a small town or a rural area can now compete for the same job as someone in a big city, all thanks to remote work. I think that's why we're seeing so much excitement around this. But I'm curious, do you think this shift is permanent? Are companies going to stick with remote work? Or do you think we'll see people going back to the office as things settle down?
I honestly believe that remote work is here to stay, Ryan. We've passed a tipping point. Even though some companies are starting to bring people back into the office, many of them are adopting hybrid models where employees can choose to work from home part of the time. And then there are companies that have gone fully remote and have no plans to go back. They've seen the benefits: reduced overhead, increased productivity, happier employees, and they don't want to lose that. Plus, now that employees have had a taste of remote work, they're demanding more flexibility. In fact, there are studies showing that employees are more likely to leave a job if they're forced back into the office full-time. It's become a key factor in job satisfaction. So, while we might see some companies returning to the office, I think the future of work is going to be a mix of remote, hybrid, and in-person. But the days of everyone being in the office from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, I think those are over for most industries.
That's a really good point. People have had a taste of remote work and they're not going to give it up easily. It's not just a perk anymore, it's an expectation for a lot of people. It's wild to think how quickly things have changed, but in a way, it feels like this was always going to happen, right? The technology was there, the infrastructure was building, and it just needed a push, which COVID-19 provided. I love that this shift isn't just benefiting companies, but also workers who are getting more control over their time and their lives. All right, Julia, we've laid the groundwork for why remote work is booming. Now let's get into the real practical stuff, the types of online jobs people can actually start today. All right, Julia, now that we've covered why remote work is booming, let's get into the real practical stuff. For someone who's listening and thinking, okay, I get it, remote work is the future, but where do I even start? What kind of jobs are actually available online? Can you break down the different types of jobs people can do from home? What's realistic for someone who's maybe new to working online or doesn't have a super specialized skill set?
Absolutely, Ryan. There's actually a huge variety of online jobs available, and the great thing is that many of them don't require you to be an expert in a specific field to get started. So, let's break it down into a few categories. First, we have freelancing, which is one of the most popular ways to work online. Freelancing covers a wide range of skills: writing, graphic design, web development, social media management, even things like video editing or translation. Platforms like Upwork and Fiverr make it easy to get started, even if you don't have much experience. For example, if you're a writer, you could start by offering blog writing or content creation services. You don't need a fancy degree, just some basic writing skills and the willingness to learn. Same goes for graphic design. There are plenty of free tools out there, like Canva, that can help you create high-quality work without needing to be a Photoshop expert. What I love about freelancing is that it allows you to build up your skills while earning money, and you can start small and scale up as you get more experience.
That's a really good point. Freelancing seems like a flexible option, especially for someone who wants to dip their toes in and start with smaller projects. And I like that it doesn't require a ton of experience up front. You can learn as you go and improve your skills along the way. So freelancing is a great option. But what if someone's not sure what skill they could offer? Maybe they've never really thought of themselves as a writer or a designer. What other types of online jobs could they look at?
Great question, Ryan. Not everyone feels like they have a specific skill to offer right away, but there are plenty of other options that don't require specialized skills. One of those is virtual assistants. Virtual assistants, or VAs, help businesses and entrepreneurs with administrative tasks like managing emails, scheduling appointments, or even handling social media. You don't need to be an expert in any one thing. You just need to be organized and reliable. There are lots of online platforms like Time, etc., or Belay that connect virtual assistants with clients, but you can also find work directly through sites like LinkedIn. Another option is customer service. Many companies are hiring remote customer support reps who help customers via email, chat, or phone. It's pretty straightforward work, and often all you need is a reliable internet connection and good communication skills. And then there's online tutoring or teaching. If you have expertise in a particular subject, like math or English, you can tutor students from all over the world through platforms like VIP Kid or Chegg Tutors.
I love that. Virtual assistants and customer service roles sound like great entry points for people who may not have technical skills, but are organized and good at multitasking. And tutoring. I've heard a lot about that, especially for people teaching English online. That's become a big market, right? I know a few people who've made decent money tutoring kids overseas, and it sounds like you don't need to be a certified teacher to get started. So freelancing, virtual assistants, customer service, tutoring, these are all solid options. But what about people who are maybe more entrepreneurial or creative? What if someone wants to sell products or start something of their own?
Exactly, Ryan. If you're more entrepreneurial, there's a huge opportunity in e-commerce. You can start an online store selling physical products without even needing to handle inventory yourself, thanks to dropshipping or print-on-demand services. Platforms like Shopify make it super easy to set up a store, and you can partner with suppliers who ship the products directly to your customers. So you don't have to worry about storing or shipping anything yourself. Print-on-demand is great if you're creative and want to sell custom-designed products like t-shirts, mugs, or posters. You upload your design, and the platform prints and ships the product for you when someone makes a purchase. Another option is Etsy, which is perfect if you're into handmade goods or crafts. People are making a full-time living selling jewelry, art, candles, or home decor on Etsy. And if you're not into physical products, there's also the world of content creation. If you like making videos, starting a blog, or even creating a podcast like we're doing now, there are plenty of ways to monetize that through ads, sponsorships, or affiliate marketing. The key here is building an audience, and once you have that, you can turn your passion into income.
That's so cool. I've heard of print-on-demand and dropshipping, and it sounds like such a low-risk way to start a business. You don't need to invest in a bunch of inventory up front, and you can test out different products to see what works. And content creation. That's becoming huge, especially with platforms like YouTube and Instagram making it easier for people to get their content out there. I know it takes time to build an audience, but I've seen people turn their blogs or YouTube channels into full-time businesses. So, Julia, we've covered a lot here. Freelancing, virtual assistants, customer service, tutoring, e-commerce, and content creation. There's something for everyone. But I'm curious. How does someone figure out which one is right for them? What would you recommend to someone who's listening right now and thinking, this all sounds great, but I'm not sure where to start?
That's a great question, Ryan. And honestly, the best advice I can give is to start by thinking about what you enjoy and what skills you already have. If you love writing or creating content, then freelancing or content creation might be a natural fit. If you're super organized and love helping people stay on top of things, then virtual assistants could be perfect for you. If you're a teacher or have expertise in a subject, tutoring is a great option. And if you're more of an entrepreneurial type, selling products online or starting a YouTube channel might be your thing. The important thing is not to overthink it too much. You don't have to have everything figured out right away. Just pick something that sounds interesting and give it a try. You can always pivot later if it's not the right fit. What's great about online work is that there's room to experiment. Start with small gigs or projects, see what you enjoy, and build from there. The flexibility of working online means you can test the waters and grow as you go. The key is to just get started, because once you take that first step, the opportunities start to open up.
All right, Julia. We've talked about the different types of online jobs, and I think people are probably getting excited about all the possibilities. But before someone dives in, let's talk about the practical side. What skills do they actually need to succeed in these online roles? And on top of that, what tools should they have in place to make sure they're set up for success? A lot of people might be thinking, do I need to be a tech expert? Or is this going to cost me a fortune to get started? Let's break it down and make it clear what's essential and what's nice to have, but not a deal breaker.
Absolutely, Ryan. And I think this is such an important part of the conversation. A lot of people feel intimidated by the idea of working online because they think they need to be experts in all these fancy tools, or that they need a degree in something technical. But the truth is, you don't need a whole lot to get started. In terms of skills, the basics will take you a long way. First off, communication is key, especially in a remote environment where most of your interactions will be through email, chat, or video calls. Whether you're freelancing or working as a virtual assistant, being able to communicate clearly and professionally is crucial. Clients and employers need to know what you're working on, and you'll need to ask questions to clarify tasks. Another important skill is time management. When you're working from home, it's easy to get distracted or lose track of time, especially if you don't have a manager looking over your shoulder. Learning how to organize your day, set priorities, and stick to deadlines is a must. Tools like Trello or Asana can help you manage projects. But honestly, even something as simple as a to-do list can be enough.
Right. Communication and time management are definitely huge. I've even noticed that in my own work. It's all about being clear and staying on top of things when you don't have someone physically checking in on you. So for people who might be a little concerned about time management, do you have any specific techniques or methods you recommend? Maybe for someone who's juggling remote work with other responsibilities like kids or even another part-time job?
Great question, and it's something a lot of people struggle with when they first start working online. One method that's really popular, and that I personally use, is the Pomodoro technique. It's simple but effective. You work in focused blocks of time, usually 25 minutes, followed by a 5-minute break. After about 4 of these work sessions, you take a longer break, maybe 15 or 20 minutes. This helps you stay focused while preventing burnout. It's also great for breaking big tasks into smaller, more manageable chunks. Another tip is to set clear boundaries. When you're working from home, it can be tempting to mix work with personal time, but that can lead to feeling like you're working all the time. So, try to create a dedicated workspace, even if it's just a corner of your room, and set specific hours for when you'll be on the clock. This is especially important if you're balancing work with kids or other responsibilities. And lastly, use tools that work for you. Whether that's a simple Google Calendar for scheduling or something more detailed like Notion for managing projects and ideas. The key is to find what keeps you organized and stick with it.
That's awesome advice. I've heard great things about the Pomodoro technique, and it seems like a great way to stay on task without feeling overwhelmed. So in terms of tools, we've got Trello, Asana, Google Calendar, and Notion for organizing tasks. But what about the tech side of things? I know people are sometimes concerned about whether their home setup is good enough to handle remote work. What would you say are the essential tools or equipment someone needs to get started? Do they need a high-end computer, or can they work with something more basic? That's awesome advice. I've heard great things about the Pomodoro technique, and it seems like a great way to stay on task without feeling overwhelmed. So in terms of tools, we've got Trello, Asana, Google Calendar, and Notion for organizing tasks. But what about the tech side of things? I know people are sometimes concerned about whether their home setup is good enough to handle remote work. What would you say are the essential tools or equipment someone needs to get started? Do they need a high-end computer, or can they work with something more basic? That's great to hear, Julia, because I know a lot of people worry that they need to invest a lot of money into fancy equipment before they can even get started. But like you said, it's more about having the basics, a reliable computer and strong internet connection, and not necessarily the most expensive gear. So, we've covered the skills like communication and time management, and we've talked about tools. Now, let's talk about something that I think holds people back: self-discipline. You touched on it earlier, but working from home requires a lot of personal responsibility. How do you stay motivated and avoid the temptation to slack off when you're working in your own space? What's your strategy for staying productive?
I'm glad you brought that up because this is something that holds people back unnecessarily. You really don't need a high-end setup to start working online. The most important thing you need is a reliable computer and a good internet connection. That's it. Your laptop doesn't need to be the latest model as long as it's capable of running basic programs like Google Docs, Zoom, or whatever tools you'll need for your specific job. For example, if you're a writer, you can get by with just Google Docs or Word. And if you're doing virtual assistants, you'll mostly be using email and scheduling software, which don't require a ton of processing power. As for the internet connection, it's really important to have a stable and fast connection, especially if you're doing jobs that require video calls or uploading content. I'd recommend at least 10 to 15 megabits per second for general work, but if you're dealing with large files, you might want something faster. Other than that, a good pair of headphones or a microphone can be helpful, especially if you're doing video calls or creating content like podcasts or YouTube videos. And if you're doing something like customer service or tutoring, having a quiet, comfortable workspace will go a long way in helping you focus and sound professional on calls.
That's so important. Treating your home workspace like a real office and sticking to a routine makes a huge difference. And I like the idea of small rewards. It's a good way to keep yourself on track without feeling burned out. So, Julia, to sum it up, communication, time management, discipline, and the right tools are the key ingredients for succeeding in the online world. With those in place, you're setting yourself up for success. We've covered a lot of ground, but before we wrap up this segment, is there anything else you think people need to know about the essentials for remote work?
Yeah, self-discipline is a big one. When you're working from home, there's no one watching over your shoulder, so it's easy to get distracted, whether it's by social media, TV, or even household chores. For me, it's all about creating a routine and sticking to it. I start my day as if I'm going to a regular office job. I wake up, get dressed, and have a set start time. Even though I'm working from home, I treat it like any other job. That mental shift helps me take it seriously. Another thing I do is set clear goals for each day. I use a system called time blocking, where I break my day into chunks of time dedicated to specific tasks. For example, I might spend 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. focused on client work, then take a short break and use the next block for answering emails or managing my schedule. I also try to limit distractions as much as possible. I'll use apps like Freedom to block distracting websites during work hours, or I'll put my phone on airplane mode. And one last thing that helps me stay motivated is having small rewards. After finishing a big task or project, I'll reward myself with something, like taking a longer break or doing something I enjoy. These little incentives can keep you going throughout the day, especially when motivation dips.
Julia, we've talked about all the exciting opportunities in remote work, but there's a flip side to this too: scams and pitfalls. A lot of people are hesitant to dive into online jobs because they've heard about these horror stories where someone pays for a job listing, works for a client who never pays, or even falls for a job that doesn't exist. I think it's really important that we help our listeners understand how to protect themselves from these risks. So, let's get real here. What are the red flags people should watch out for? And how can they make sure the jobs they're looking at are legitimate?
I'd say the only other thing to keep in mind is to stay flexible and keep learning. The online world is constantly evolving, and the tools or platforms you use today might change in a few months. Don't be afraid to learn new things or adapt to different ways of working. There are so many free resources out there, like YouTube tutorials or courses on Coursera and Udemy, where you can pick up new skills if you need them. The ability to adapt and grow will keep you competitive and help you navigate any challenges that come your way. So as long as you're open to learning and staying organized, you'll do great.
Yeah, I've seen those job posts before. You know, the ones that say, earn $5,000 a week from home with no experience necessary, and it's hard not to get drawn in because who wouldn't want that? But it makes sense that if something sounds way too good to be true, it probably is. So, aside from these too good to be true offers and paying upfront fees, are there other signs that might signal a scam?
I'm really glad you brought this up, Ryan, because this is something that's a real issue in the world of online work. Unfortunately, with the rise of remote work, there has also been an increase in scams. The good news is that there are clear warning signs you can watch out for. One of the biggest red flags is when a job asks you to pay upfront, whether it's for training, for access to the job listing, or for any kind of fee. Legitimate employers will never ask you to pay to work for them. Another thing to watch out for is when the job offer sounds too good to be true. For example, if someone is offering to pay you thousands of dollars a week for very little work or experience, that's a huge red flag. Scammers often make these types of offers to lure people in. Always be skeptical of jobs that seem way too easy for the amount of money being offered.
That's a great point. If someone's rushing you to accept a job or isn't willing to explain the details, that's definitely a sign to take a step back. So, Julia, let's say someone finds a job online that seems legitimate. What steps should they take to verify it before diving in? How can they really make sure it's safe?
Definitely. Another big one is vague job descriptions or lack of details. If the job post doesn't clearly explain what you'll be doing, that's a red flag. Scammers tend to use very generic language and don't give specifics about the role, the tasks, or the company itself. A legitimate employer will always have a clear job description, and if you're talking to someone and they can't give you specific details about what the job involves, that's a reason to be cautious. Also, be wary of job offers that come out of nowhere. If someone contacts you with an offer for a job that you didn't apply for, or if they're pressuring you to take the job without an interview or proper vetting process, that's another red flag. Real employers typically go through a hiring process. Interviews, discussions about the role, even tests or assessments depending on the job. They don't just hand out job offers immediately without getting to know you.
I really like that tip about using platforms like Upwork that have protections in place. It adds an extra layer of security, especially for freelancers who might be working with someone for the first time. And researching the company, honestly, that's something a lot of people skip over, but it's so important. Just a quick search can save you from so much trouble down the line. What about when people are asked to share personal information? I know some job applications ask for things like social security numbers or bank account info. When is it okay to share that kind of information, and when should people be cautious?
The first thing I always recommend is to research the company. Do a quick Google search for the company's name along with keywords like scam or review. You'll often find forums or websites where people talk about their experiences with that company. If it's a scam, chances are someone else has already flagged it online. You can also check platforms like Glassdoor or Indeed to see if there are any employee reviews. Another great tool is LinkedIn. If the company is legitimate, they should have a presence on LinkedIn, and you'll be able to see their employees and their activity on the platform. Next, if you're working through a freelance platform like Upwork or Fiverr, use the platform's built-in protections, like escrow payments. This way, your payment is held by the platform and only released when the job is completed. That prevents the client from disappearing without paying you. And finally, always ask for a contract. A legitimate employer or client will have no problem providing a written agreement that outlines the scope of the work, the payment terms, and the deadlines. If they refuse to sign a contract or try to work outside of official channels, that's a huge red flag.
That's such valuable advice. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of a new job offer and overlook these things, but being cautious with personal information is crucial. So, Julia, just to sum up for our listeners, we've talked about avoiding upfront fees, being wary of vague job descriptions, researching companies, and protecting your personal information. These are all great tips. Is there anything else people should keep in mind to stay safe when looking for online jobs?
Great question, Ryan. You should be extremely cautious about sharing any personal information, especially early in the process. There's no reason for a legitimate employer to ask for your social security number or bank details during the initial stages of a job application. That information typically only comes into play once you've been officially hired, and even then, it should be handled securely through proper channels. If you're asked for sensitive information before you've even had an interview or before an official offer is made, that's a huge red flag. Scammers often ask for this information to steal your identity or gain access to your accounts. A good rule of thumb is to never provide personal information like your social security number, tax ID, or banking info until you've confirmed that the job is legitimate, have an official offer, and have signed a contract. And even then, make sure it's being handled through a secure, trusted system. If you're ever unsure, ask questions. A legitimate employer will have no problem explaining why they need certain information and how they'll use it.
That's a great way to wrap this up, Julia. Trust your instincts, do your research, and don't rush into anything. I think those are principles that will keep people safe when they're navigating the online job world. Thanks for all the solid advice on how to avoid scams. I'm sure this is going to help a lot of people feel more confident about stepping into remote work safely. All right, Julia, we've talked about the types of online jobs available, the skills and tools people need, and how to avoid scams. Now let's get to what I think most people are really eager to know. How do they actually land their first online job? For someone listening right now who's ready to jump in but doesn't know where to start, what are the practical steps they should take to secure that first gig or remote job?
I'd say the last thing to remember is to trust your gut. If something feels off or too good to be true, it's okay to take a step back and reassess. Scammers rely on urgency and excitement, so if you feel pressured to make a quick decision, that's a signal to slow down and do your research. Don't be afraid to ask questions or take time to think things over. It's better to miss out on a potentially fake opportunity than to get caught up in a scam. And also, join online communities. There are so many freelancer and remote worker groups on platforms like Facebook or Reddit where people share their experiences and warn each other about scams. You can learn a lot from these communities, and they can be a great resource for staying safe.
That's great advice. I think a lot of people get stuck on the idea that they need tons of experience or a huge portfolio before they can start, but you're saying it's really about just showcasing what you can do, even if it's something you've created on your own. So once someone has that portfolio in place, what's the next step? Should they head straight to job boards and start applying?
Great question, Ryan. And this is where it gets really exciting because once you understand the process, landing your first online job is totally within reach. So, the first thing I always recommend is to identify your niche. You want to start by figuring out what you're good at and what kind of work interests you. Think about your existing skills, whether they're from previous jobs, hobbies, or personal projects. For example, if you've got good writing skills, content writing or copywriting might be a good fit. If you're organized, maybe you'd make a great virtual assistant. Once you know your niche, the next step is to build a simple portfolio. And I can't stress this enough. You don't need a massive portfolio to get started. Even if you've never done paid work before, create some sample projects that show off your skills. If you're a writer, write a few blog posts on topics that interest you. If you're into design, create a couple of mock logos or website designs. Just a few examples of what you can do will go a long way.
That makes a lot of sense. So you're saying start small, build reviews, and don't be afraid to use your network. I like that. Now, I know that for a lot of people, one of the toughest parts about applying for jobs, whether online or in person, is writing a strong proposal or cover letter. What advice do you have for crafting a proposal that really stands out and helps you land that first job?
Exactly. Once you've got your portfolio together, it's time to start applying, and there are a few different approaches you can take. First, I'd recommend signing up for freelance platforms like Upwork, Fiverr, or Freelancer.com. These platforms are great because they connect you directly with clients who are looking for specific services. You can set up a profile, upload your portfolio, and start bidding on jobs. One tip I have for beginners is to start by applying for smaller projects. It's tempting to go for the big, high-paying jobs right away. But when you're just starting out, it's better to build some experience and get a few positive reviews under your belt. Clients on these platforms often look for freelancers with good reviews, so taking on smaller projects helps you build credibility. Another approach is to leverage your personal network. Let your friends, family, and colleagues know that you're available for freelance or remote work. You'd be surprised how often people find opportunities through word of mouth. And don't forget about LinkedIn. It's an excellent platform for networking and finding remote job postings. Make sure your profile is updated and showcases your skills and experience. Even if you don't have direct experience in the field you want to work in, you can highlight transferable skills from past jobs.
That's great advice. Customizing your proposal, keeping it short and focused, and making sure they can see your work up front. I think a lot of people overcomplicate it. But like you said, it's about showing the client you understand their specific needs. Now, what about persistence? You mentioned earlier that people should start small and build up. How long does it typically take to land that first gig, and what should people do if they don't hear back right away?
This is a big one, Ryan, and it's something a lot of people struggle with. When you're applying for jobs, especially on freelance platforms, your proposal is often your first impression. So you really want it to shine. The first thing to remember is to customize every proposal. I know it can be tempting to use a generic template, but clients can tell when you've copy-pasted something. Take the time to read the job description carefully and tailor your proposal to that specific job. Mention something specific from the job posting that shows you've paid attention. For example, if a client is looking for a writer to help with blog posts, don't just say, "I'm a good writer." Say something like, "I saw that you're looking for someone to write about health and wellness. I've written similar articles before, and I can help you create engaging content that resonates with your audience." Show the client that you understand their needs and how you can help solve their problems. The second thing is to keep it concise. Clients don't have time to read through long, rambling proposals. Be clear, get to the point, and make it easy for them to see why you're the right person for the job. Finally, don't forget your portfolio. Include links or attach samples of your work so they can see for themselves what you're capable of.
I love that mindset, Julia. Using the waiting time to keep improving and building your skill set. It makes the whole process feel more productive. So just to sum up for our listeners, the steps are to identify your niche, build a simple portfolio, start small with your applications, write customized proposals, and stay persistent. And like you said, once that first gig comes through, it's easier to build momentum. This has been incredibly helpful, Julia. I think you've laid out a clear path for anyone who's serious about landing their first online job.
This is such an important point, Ryan. It's really easy to get discouraged if you don't land something right away, especially when you're just starting out. But the key here is persistence. It's normal to apply to multiple jobs and not hear back immediately. That doesn't mean you're not qualified. It's just part of the process. My advice is to keep applying and stay consistent. If you're applying for jobs every day, chances are you'll start to see responses within a few weeks. It might take a bit longer to land that first gig, but once you do, things get easier. After you complete your first job and get that first review, it becomes easier to build momentum. Another tip is to use that time wisely. While you're applying for jobs, continue working on your portfolio or learning new skills that will make you more competitive. You can take online courses, update your LinkedIn profile, or even create personal projects that showcase your abilities. The key is to stay active and keep improving while you're waiting for that first opportunity.
Fantastic. So for anyone listening, whether you're looking to freelance, do virtual assistants, or something else, follow these steps and trust the process. Julia, thanks again for breaking this down so clearly. I know it's going to help a lot of people. All right, Julia. So now we've got people equipped with the tools and steps they need to land their first online job. But there's one more thing that I think a lot of people struggle with when working from home, and that's finding a balance between work and personal life. It sounds great to work from home. No commute, more flexibility, but at the same time, it can be tough to set boundaries. You know, when your work and living space are the same, it can be hard to clock out at the end of the day. So how do you manage to stay productive without letting work take over your personal life?
I'm so glad to hear that, Ryan. It really is a step-by-step process, and the key is to not get discouraged. The opportunities are out there, and as long as you stay consistent and keep improving, you'll land that first job. And once you've got that first experience under your belt, you'll start to see more doors open.
That's really solid advice, Julia. I can definitely see how having a dedicated workspace and clear hours would help keep things balanced. I think a lot of people might fall into the trap of thinking they can work whenever, and then before they know it, they're working late into the night without realizing it. It's interesting how the freedom of remote work can sometimes lead to overworking because you don't have those natural breaks that come with commuting or physically leaving the office. But what about distractions? When you're working from home, there's always something that can pull you away, whether it's family, household chores, or even just the temptation to binge watch a show. How do you stay focused without getting distracted by everything around you?
Oh, this is such an important topic, Ryan, because you're right. Working from home has a lot of perks, but it can also blur the lines between work and personal life. One of the first things I learned when I started working from home full-time was that you really need to set boundaries, both physical and mental. For me, creating a dedicated workspace was a game changer. Even if it's just a small desk in the corner of your living room, having a specific spot that's only for work helps you mentally separate work time from home time. When I sit at my desk, I know it's time to focus. And just as important, when I leave my desk, I try to mentally clock out and switch back into personal mode. This physical separation is crucial, even if you don't have a whole home office. Another thing that's really helped me is setting clear work hours. It's easy to let work spill into your evenings or weekends when there's no office to leave, but I try to set a firm schedule. For example, I start work at 9 a.m. and finish by 5 or 6 p.m. Once that time is up, I shut down my computer and try not to think about work until the next day. It's not always perfect, but setting those boundaries helps prevent burnout and lets me enjoy my personal time more.
That's really practical, Julia. I like how you're using time blocking to focus on one task at a time. It's a lot like being in the office, where you wouldn't just stop in the middle of a meeting to do laundry or check your phone. So why should it be different at home, right? And I'm sure the Pomodoro technique helps break up the day into manageable chunks. Plus, those productivity tools you mentioned, like Freedom, are great for eliminating the temptation to mindlessly scroll through social media. But what about the other side of the coin? Working from home gives you flexibility, which is great. But how do you balance the temptation to be too flexible, where you're not as productive as you should be?
Distractions are definitely one of the biggest challenges when working from home, and I've had my fair share of struggles with that. The key for me has been to stay disciplined with my routine. Like I mentioned earlier, having set work hours helps a lot because it puts me in work mode during those hours. But when it comes to specific distractions, I use a couple of techniques to stay on track. One thing that works for me is time blocking. I'll schedule blocks of time, say 45 minutes to an hour, where I focus on one task. And during that time, I don't allow myself to do anything else. No checking my phone, no browsing the web, no getting up to do the dishes. I'm fully committed to working during that block. After that, I'll take a short break to recharge, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and then I start another block. This approach, combined with tools like Pomodoro timers, keeps me on task and minimizes distractions. Another trick is to remove temptations ahead of time. For example, if I know I'll be tempted to check social media, I'll use apps like Freedom or Cold Turkey to block those websites during work hours. And for household distractions, things like chores or errands, I schedule time for them outside of work hours. If I treat work hours like I'm in a physical office, it becomes easier to avoid getting sidetracked.
That's such a valuable takeaway. Creating your own structure and accountability, especially when no one else is there to do it for you. It sounds like by setting your own deadlines and sticking to them, you're able to enjoy the flexibility of remote work without letting things pile up. I think that's the key to really thriving in a work-from-home environment. So, Julia, before we wrap up, do you have any final tips for people who are just starting out with remote work and are worried about balancing everything: work, family, personal life without getting overwhelmed?
That's a really good point, Ryan. The flexibility of working from home is one of the best parts, but it can also become a problem if you let it. Without a boss watching over your shoulder, it's easy to get into the habit of thinking, I can just do this later. And before you know it, you're pushing work off into the evening or missing deadlines. The way I've learned to handle that is by creating self-imposed deadlines and sticking to them as if they were set by a manager. For example, if I need to finish a project by Friday, I'll break that project into smaller pieces and give myself deadlines throughout the week. Maybe I'll aim to finish the first half by Wednesday and the rest by Thursday. That way, I'm not scrambling at the last minute. It's all about accountability. Even though I'm working for myself, I treat it like I'm accountable to a boss. I also make a point to schedule personal things, like exercise or family time, around my work so that I can enjoy the flexibility without sacrificing productivity. It's definitely a balance, but it's one you can manage with some structure and discipline. And when you do that, you can actually enjoy the freedom that comes with remote work without feeling like you're constantly playing catch-up.
That's such a great note to end on. Balancing patience with structure and making sure you take care of yourself. Julia, this has been amazing. I think you've given our listeners a clear understanding of how to manage remote work effectively, from productivity tips to balancing life at home. Thanks so much for sharing all of this today.
Definitely, Ryan. My biggest piece of advice for anyone starting out is to give yourself grace. Transitioning to remote work isn't always smooth at first, and it's normal to feel overwhelmed or struggle with balance in the beginning. The key is to stay patient with yourself and take small steps to create routines that work for you. Start with the basics. Set up a dedicated workspace, create a daily schedule, and block out time for focused work and personal time. Over time, you'll figure out what works best for you. And don't be afraid to ask for help. Whether it's getting support from family to manage distractions, or joining online communities where you can connect with other remote workers and share tips. Lastly, don't forget to take breaks and prioritize your mental health. It's easy to fall into the trap of working nonstop when your office is at home, but taking regular breaks, going for a walk, or just stepping away from the screen for a bit can make a huge difference in your productivity and well-being.
Absolutely. Well, that's it for today's episode, everyone. If you found this helpful, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and we'd love for you to leave a review. And of course, share this episode with anyone you think might benefit from it. We'll see you next time on Speak Up. Thanks again, Julia.
It's been a pleasure, Ryan. I'm really glad we could dive into these topics, and I hope this helps anyone out there who's thinking about starting their journey in remote work. Remember, it's all about finding what works best for you. And with time, it gets easier. Thank you, Ryan. Looking forward to hearing more from Speak Up.